Hurricane Katrina was one of the deadliest hurricanes ever to hit the United States. An estimated 1,833 people died in the hurricanes and in the flooding that followed in late August 2005, and millions of others were left homeless along the Gulf Coast and in New Orleans. Katrina was categorized as a Category 3, but turned out to be a Category 5 when finally hitting New Orleans. Katrina was also the most costly in United States history, causing $108 billion in damage. Katrina initially formed about 200 miles southeast of the Bahamas, with winds of about 40 miles per hour. It began to move its way to South Florida and weakened after passing Florida. Katrina intensified and dominated the entire Gulf of Mexico, with winds of about 175 miles per hour. The storm surge from Katrina was about 20 feet high. New Orleans is currently 1 to 2 feet below sea level, with other parts reaching as low as 7 feet below sea level in the furthest reaches of eastern New Orleans. Since many portions of New Orleans are below sea level, there are levees keeping the water outside of the city. Many of those levees were only meant for a Category 3 hurricane. When Katrina hit New Orleans and ended up being a Category 5 hurricane, there were more than 50 failures of levees and flood walls that protected the city. The failures of levees and flood walls caused flooding in 80% of New Orleans. The final death toll was 1,836, primarily from Louisiana and Mississippi. More than half of these victims were senior citizens, and at the time of the flood, 705 people were still reported as missing. Approximately 9,000 residents sheltered in the Superdome as Katrina came ashore. Despite the Superdome as an evacuation center, government officials were criticized for poor planning and preparation. There was no water purification equipment on site, nor any chemicals for toilets or antibiotics stored for a crisis. There were no designated medical staff at work in the evacuation center as well. The Louisiana National Guard finally delivered 3 truckloads of water and 7 truckloads of meals ready to eat, but only enough for 3 days for 15,000 people. The Superdome was considered a last resort for evacuees, and people who evacuated to the Superdome were warned to bring their own supplies due to the lack of supplies at the Superdome. The smell was said to be revolting due to the breakdown of hygiene, urinals, and plumbing. August 30th, the Superdome began to fill slowly with water due to deterioration of the building, and evacuees were ordered to move to the Astrodome in Houston, Texas on August 31st. Hurricane Katrina affected over 15 million in different ways, from having to evacuate their homes, rising gas prices, and economy suffering. The storm displaced more than 1 million people in the Gulf Coast region. It also damaged more than 1 million housing units in the Gulf Coast region. Half of these damaged units were located in Louisiana. There were over 134,000 housing units damaged in New Orleans alone. An estimated 80% of New Orleans was underwater, up to 20 feet deep in places. 10 years later, the region is still recovering from Katrina.